next I'm gonna welcome our councillor, Aneesa Akbar, to say a few words.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on today. So I just sort of wanted to, I guess, talk briefly about some of the experiences that I've had in terms of being a councillor, and I guess just in the way in which Hull's sort of changed as well. So when I moved to the city in 2010, it's grown in its diversity, I think, and I think everyone on the call can sort of see how much Hull has changed. And I think in some ways we've been playing catch up in terms of how we listen and reflect what it is, the needs of our BAME communities in the city. And speaking as one of 3 BAME councillors in the city, that conversation has started, but it's been a bit slow at times in getting institutions to listen and getting other people to listen to some of these conversations. And there's been great work that's been going on in the city, so I'm not dismissing anything that's been going on, but I think sometimes the institutions have been a bit slow to catch up on the things that have been going on. And I think for me, one of the things that has been really clear as to where we're going forward, Black Lives Matter really allowed us to start having a proper conversation about what institutional racism looks like and how that permeates throughout our institutions and how that affects our BAME communities. And for the first time in a long time, speaking as a person of colour, I felt as though it was the first time that I was able to openly talk about some of the experiences that I have personally and others in my community, are experiencing on a daily basis. And we've seen the way in which COVID has impacted BAME communities, and whether that's looking at, the death rates that have come about. And there's been many conversations as to why that is the case, ranging from some people trying to push a medical line, whereas from my perspective, it looks as though that the reason why a lot of these cases have sort of been ignored and why it's gone on comes through a class perspective. And you'd expect me to say that as a Labour politician, but I think one of the things that has been really clear is that we've allowed people to, essentially die, like go back to work and die, being key workers. We've not given them PPE, and predominantly when we've been looking at, places, whether it's in the NHS, whether it's the key worker roles, it's BAME people and working class people that have been sent out to make sure that our economy has carried on running and made sure that, our country has carried on ticking. And I think we have to be really clear about why looking at it through this lens is really important for me. Because I think the other element of it, and speaking as a councillor for Central, we have a lot of houses of multiple occupancy around Springbank and Beverley Road. And we've seen the way in which actually, our government has been talking about the fact that, you need to be able to self-isolate, you need to be able to, be given spaces to, make sure that you're not infecting other people. But when you're on poverty wages and when you're in houses of multiple occupancy where you're not able to self-isolate, that is another factor that stops, that it increases the risk for working class people and BAME communities as well in that. And I think we need to, have an analysis of why that is. So the other element for me, which I think was quite scary about looking at sort of like the conversation around COVID, has been some of the way in which, our local media has tried to blame, and also national media has tried to blame BAME communities for the spread of COVID. And that's something else that needs to be challenged in terms of the narrative that's been going on. And for me, there was a lot of conversation. There's a lot of conversation that was going on locally when we had the protests around Black Lives Matter, where people were talking about fundamental rights, equal rights in society, and about their experiences. And what we saw locally and nationally was the fact that Black Lives Matter was going to be the reason that we were going to have a second spike. That's what was going on, and that was just proven to be demonstratively false. But there was no acknowledgement from media sources. There was no acknowledgement from politicians to say, well, actually, people that were socially safely practicing social distancing whilst making their voices heard about some of the experiences that we face in society was not acknowledged then, and was allowed to create a narrative about the fact that it's BAME communities that aren't adhering to social distancing. And I'll say this on this call, I'll say one of the things that really upset me is the way in which Springbank and Beverley Road have been targeted, for the way in which it was said that they were the places that social distancing wasn't being adhered to. There was a furore around Eid and the fact that people would be going to each other's houses and wouldn't be adhering to social distancing. I've spoken to the mosque locally, and the way in which they've handled the situation, the way in which they've communicated to our communities about what's been going on has been second to none, really. And a lot of people have been trying to do their best in a vacuum of real leadership, I guess, from the government in terms of what the message is really to keep ourselves safe. And I was in an area committee recently after being told that Springbank and Beverley Road were the worst places, for social distancing. And it turned out, and you're not, well, I think you might believe where the worst place was in our area committee, which includes Bricknell Avenues and Central. It was actually Avenues that was having a lot of calls to the police about, people not adhering to social distancing. So these narratives are really important. If we're going to tackle some of like the institutional biases that go with that exist within society and that have impacted the way in which we've spoken about COVID, then we actually need to get the facts out as well. And we need to say like what actually is going on in our city and not trying to scapegoat people in these areas. So I'm just going to sort of, I guess, end on so, as a person of colour, I see racism all the time. I've experienced it when I've tried to raise my voice about it. You can follow me on Twitter if you want, and you can see any time that I mention anything to do with racism, there'll be loads of people queuing up to tell me that it doesn't exist, or I don't really know what I'm talking about, or that, or those sorts of scenarios. But I hear daily from people about their experiences in this city and about how it has impacted their access to services, whether it's impacted their ability to function within Hull as citizens as they would like to do, and whether that's through the NHS or what other police. Their experiences are incredibly important. And so one of the things that we want to do as a council is to develop a BAME working group that looks at our policies and our institutions and the way in which we're going to go forward in terms of making sure that everyone is connected together. Because I think the other side of this is that, we have noted that we are going into a recession. All of our communities are going to need support. We've had a decade of austerity. And if we're really going to bring people together in this conversation, making sure that we're going to be able to support all of our communities, as Ruth said, is the best way to be able to, bring people together. And we've seen the way in which artists have been able to do that. So I'm really supportive of the conversations that are going on, more than happy to lend my support. But I guess I just went a bit too political, but I'll end there.
Thank you, Aneesa. Thank you very much for sharing that with us.